So, good afternoon. Thanks all for coming to this session. My name is Paul Garner. I work at the School of Tropical Medicine in Liverpool, and I'm co-chairing this with Taryn Young. And we heard this morning from Ruth Stewart about evidence ecosystems and evidence networks. And so today we're going to have some presentations from a network that's been around for a little while. 1992, we started work in systematic reviews related to infectious diseases and set up the Cochrane Infectious Diseases Group. 1996, Jimmy Volmink from Cape Town joined us, and a little later, Taryn Young became part of this network, primarily supported by the UK aid programme through DFID. And it's a network that the whole presentation is about. It has studies and systematic reviews that come from this evidence ecosystem. And the title is Evidence to Action, and I've been the director within this network during this time. And we've called it Evidence to Action, start with the action, because so often in research, and in my own institution, people talk about translating research into policy, but it's the wrong way around. It's the researchers generate something that's beautiful and wonderful, and then it's the expectation that the policymakers just pick it up because it's so marvelous. So we look at it in a different kind of way. And what we're saying, and our philosophy, is what intervention, what strategy do you want to introduce? What strategy do you want to scale up? What is it that is in question at the moment? And then start looking at the evidence underpinning it. And this was taught to me many, many years ago when I was a young researcher by a man called Ken Newell, who's Professor of International Health in Liverpool. And he did some of the original trials in tetanus toxoid vaccine. And at the time, people were looking at surveys for needs assessment. So there were big surveys going on throughout the world. And he'd been just advising on a disability survey in China. And these questionnaires and this research that was being carried out, there was massive questionnaires looking at refractive errors, looking at whether people had limps. And he came out and said, if you're going to look at those things, are you going to supply the entire population with glasses, with walking sticks? Your surveys should have in mind the interventions and what you're going to do about it to guide the research that you do. And he was talking about surveys, but we simply took that message and applied it to the process of us within Cochrane setting up our work. So at the time, for example, impregnated mosquito nets for malaria were being considered. There were 5 mortality trials. They weren't widely used. So we did a meta-analysis and systematic review of death of the 5 mortality trials, because that was the action. Then we looked at the evidence underpinning it, provided the evidence to support that policy. And similarly with oral rehydration salt solution, people were considering low osmolarity. A systematic review helped them with that decision. So before we move on, just to prove that we're not supplicants to the sort of development industry underpinning ideas that they want, you know, sometimes policies will be brought up where the systematic review may well challenge the evidence. And Jimmy Volmink is well known and for work at that time challenging WHO about the evidence underpinning directly observed therapy. So you think about the intervention, but you don't always underpin it. So this, starting with the action, actually, for us, turned out to be the way we interacted with DFID, our funder. And our key performance indicator for them and for us, which we both signed up to, was about increasing the number of decisions in the health sector in lower middle income countries based on reliable evidence. And simply that one sentence forces you to prioritize, helps you engage in policy or challenge policy. So we promote as much as we can this idea of looking at systematic reviews through this lens. And certainly that's what we're going to describe, some of that today. Some of the side effects within this network that we've found is that doing it this way helps, really motivates researchers because they're engaged in things that are important. We found out what I never expected, the little lies and twists in some of the researchers as they present evidence, and the way systematic reviews can then provide a mirror for good practice. And we've learnt about academic conflicts of interest, sometimes in development being as important as commercial conflicts of interest. So we've got 5 presentations, all around different topics. They are also aimed to illustrate the variety of evidence we use. Ingrid, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, is looking at qualitative research, synthesis. Joseph is going to talk about malaria guidelines, which is predominantly randomized controlled trials that were used for this. There are some, Sophie is going to step in to the discipline of development economics and how our lens on their work revealed many different things. And Hannah and Neeraj are going to talk about TB guideline development in India, and then Rufaro about systematic reviews of experimental animal studies. We hope you enjoy it. We're going to have each session with a couple of questions after each, and then a roundup at the end. So we do hope you like this. So without any further more waffle from me, I'd like to introduce Ingrid Eschun-Wilson, who's an HIV physician and researcher who's taken over management of the Cochrane HIV group here in Cape Town, and she's going to talk about a review that she's currently engaged in. Over to you, Ingrid.